Welcome to the Raise podcast. I'm Carol Barwick. We're here to raise your confidence and inspire your creativity. Each episode, we will have a different guest who will be discussing our Raise word. The Raise word is a word that will encourage you or empower you and at times inspire you to explore the word a little more for yourself. Well, hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Raise podcast. We've had all kinds of different words. We've had the word impact, we've had the word communication, and today we're going to look at the word enough. And I'm really pleased to be speaking to my friend Lorraine Wheeler. I met Lorraine through a long COVID group. She is an amazing creative and she's a real activist for climate change. So I thought it would be a great thing to do to talk to her about enough. So good morning, Lorraine. How are you this morning?
Good morning. I'm well, thank you. Well, I have a bit of a bad voice, so good luck to anybody listening.
No problem. So, Lorraine, before we dive into all that kind of enough means, what does the word enough mean to you?
Oh, well, I know that from your Facebook page, people are explaining it in so many different ways. But I think for me, when I think of enough, I'm predominantly thinking of the excesses that we have as a society. And how we can foster this sense that we all have enough and use that as, I guess, a catalyst to kind of dial back our consumerism and start being more kind of climate conscious with every decision that we make.
Brilliant. Yeah, the Facebook group that Lorraine's talking about is the Raise Community Group. And we talk about these words kind of every day. And there's been so many different ideas of framing enough, hasn't there? They've talked about enough as in the stuff that we've got, but also enough as in can't do any more. And
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's so many different ways. Talk to me first of all a little bit about what enough means to you in terms of kind of the climate. You've been talking quite a lot on social media about climate change and that, you know, we've really got to make a change and doing that a little bit with your son as well, which has been brilliant. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, first of all, I think it's worth saying that we all feel, I think, as if we're not doing enough. And I think if we're not careful, we can all get this sort of sense that we're almost paralyzed by guilt or paralyzed by just kind of the enormity of the issue.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the word enough, I think we need to realize that what we have to do obviously requires us to do more, but that we don't want to kind of bog ourselves down with a sense of guilt, because that's counterproductive as well. So I'm not by any stretch putting myself forward as somebody who has everything right. I get it wrong all the time. I just personally feel that the climate crisis is the issue, particularly for parents, but for anybody who sees the sort of looks towards the next 20, 30, 60, 70 years and thinks, gosh, you know, what are we going to leave behind? So I don't want anybody to think that there's this sense that they're not doing enough in a sense,
Yeah,
or they are not enough. For me, the climate crisis thing is about the fact that as a society, we have lost sight of what enough is.
right.
We have lost sight of what sufficient it looks like. And it's not our fault particularly, it's the way the society has evolved over the last particularly 50 years in terms of media and marketing and just the stuff that we have at our disposal, even the disposable income.
Yeah.
And again, I'm talking from a very privileged position. I'm talking as a middle-class white woman living in a safe Western country.
Yeah.
But I think if we all could consider how we decide when we have enough and what enough actually looks like.
Yeah, that's a huge question, is it? But I love the way that you kind of, you know, had the caveat of people can't just do everything. We can't do that. You've got to start from a place of wanting to make a small difference rather than starting from a place of guilt. Because ultimately, if you start from a place of guilt, you're kind of, you end up running down what you're able to do quite quickly, I think. So yeah, it's such a big topic, isn't it? And I wonder if we can just explore for a minute. I'm curious about the difference between enough and sufficient, because sufficient for me kind of implies a feeling of content and kind of fed or having a need met. Is enough the same, do you think?
It's interesting, obviously, because I was coming on here, I had a little look at what the word means. And I think most of the definitions that I have found, at least, lend themselves to sufficient more than what we sort of tend to use the word to mean. So we tend to say, oh, I've had enough. Or that's enough, if we're, scolding our children, not that any of us do that.
Of course not.
But I would say the way we've started to use the word in that sense is almost, by the time we say enough, we mean too much. We've already had too much.
Okay.
So I think sufficient is actually a really good interpretation of the word. And it's about fostering, therefore, what is sufficient unto the day.
Yeah.
So my great aunt, bless her soul, used to say when we went out for meals, she used to push her plate away and say, I've had an elegant sufficiency.
Oh, that's lovely.
Rather than stuffing her face and emptying her plate, which I think is sort of metaphorically, I guess, what we now feel like we need to do.
Yeah. I love the phrase from Mary Poppins. My husband absolutely hates it, but she says, enough is as good as a feast.
That is brilliant.
Yeah.
Because what that speaks to me, and I love Mary Poppins as well. I grew up on it.
And did you like my Mary Poppins voice? I've been channeling.
That was amazing. Amazing, Julie Andrews.
Practically
You're doing a lot
perfect.
of Julie Andrews at the moment. Well done,
We are. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Lost train of thought. Yeah. So the idea of enough being as good as a feast is that really anything beyond enough is excess and is therefore wasted. So like when you put too much food in your body, and I'm talking to myself, preaching to myself here, your body doesn't need the excess. So when we clear our plates, literally, when we clear our plates, rather than stopping when we've had the elegant sufficiency, we are just giving ourselves far more than we need. And so whether you stop at the elegant sufficiency or whether you clear your plate, as in a feast, you're still meeting your needs, you're then exceeding your needs. So I think Mary Poppins is absolutely right.
She's a good egg, isn't she, Mary
She's
Poppins?
bob on.
And from a creative point of view, obviously we're both creatives. The person that created Mary Poppins, they're the ones that had all those ideas. And if you think about all the different things that she said and did, that's quite a person, isn't it, to have kind of created. Is it Mary L. Travers? Is that right? I think he created
PL. Was it PL Travers?
PL Travers. We'll check that. Sorry, everybody. Everyone, all the Mary Poppins fans are going Carol, head in hands. Can't believe.
Watch for the footnotes. Yeah.
Yeah, but so an elegant sufficiency. And as you said, we are both talking from very privileged, middle class, white background. And so talking about, eating more than we need and things like that, totally recognize that there are way, way too many people just in this country, probably just in our region, that don't have enough.
Absolutely.
And that kind of stark contrast. I wonder, just going back for a minute, the idea of clearing your plate, that was something that was always pushed at school. That I would literally have a dinner lady standing over me until I'd finished eating everything. And I wonder if that's part of a culture that, whether we're doing better at that now, or it's an interesting one, isn't it? But for me, definitely, it was a bit of a generational thing that you ate everything on your plate and you couldn't have pudding till you'd had your full main course.
Yeah, I remember those dinner ladies. We had ones that we really liked who would let you just sneakily clear your plate.
Yeah.
And then we had ones who were particularly strict, and saw obviously waste as a terrible thing. And waste is a terrible thing. But the food analogy is brilliant because when you think about going out for a meal, you either pay for a meal and it comes plated up and somebody else has decided the quantity that you should eat. And then there's that sense of, well, I've paid for it, right? So I don't want to get a doggy
The
bag.
value. Yeah,
I'm going
absolutely.
to get my money's worth, and I'm going
Yes.
to shove it all in my face.
Yeah.
Or you might go to a carvery or a buffet where you get to choose how much you put on your plate, but you still paid a set price. And I think in that instance, when we're out for a meal, we're more inclined to actually put even more on our plates when we can just help ourselves. But the opposite, I think, is true when you have people over as guests for dinner. So if you plate up a meal for your friends who come for dinner or family, people feel obliged to eat what you've given them. Whereas if you do the home style cooking where you leave things in the middle and people help themselves, just like a buffet, really, but they're your guest, I think people are much more inclined to take what they need, what is sufficient, what is an elegant sufficiency to them. And then everybody has a clear plate. They've taken what they need, and whatever is left can be put to a different use. So I wonder why we behave so much differently when food is in front of us at a friend's house or at our own house than when we're actually like out being consumers in the outside world. I don't know.
So much challenge in that, isn't there? I wonder how much we need to notice about the link between value and enough. Because when you're talking about, spending, I mean, I'm going out for dinner tonight, and the idea that you've spent money and so you're going to get your money's worth, as you said. But the difference between valuing everything on your plate, even if it means you don't eat every single thing, as opposed to eating your money's worth.
I think that can translate as well, I think, into the clothing industry, when you talk about value, because we have devalued clothing so much. And the way we've devalued it is all along the supply chain by taking from people who don't have enough, probably. I'm thinking we just had the anniversary of the 300 or so people that died in the fire in Bangladesh, in the clothing factory. And we still have clothing manufacturers that have not signed up to take responsibility for that kind of workplace safety that we all take for granted.
Yeah.
So along the supply chain, we've obviously squeezed as much as we possibly can out of the growers of cotton, out of the producers, the factory workers, even the shipping companies, so that we could go into a supermarket or similar, or a massive chain, who will not be named, that sells incredibly cheap t-shirts for £1.30. And so we devalue the clothing, and therefore we're quite happy to have 40 t-shirts, because if they only cost £1 or £2, whereas if you're paying for something, it's real value, the cost it actually, what it actually costs to produce that item, then you're much more likely to look after it, I think.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because as a bit of a kind of paradox, some of my most loved items are actually from charity shops. So they didn't cost more, and so I value them more. But I really chose them. That sounds crazy, because when you go into a supermarket or a big chain, you obviously choose your clothes. But almost when you in a charity shop, it's a bit like the clothes choose you. And I think because you're aware that they're secondhand and you're not paying so much for them, you're willing to take a bit more of a risk, maybe, in, well, if I don't like it, then I haven't spent like a premium amount of money on it. But then you're also talking about that upper end where you pay a lot more and you value it because you've given more money to buying it, but you thought about who's making it, and that's more important, isn't it? Really, it's about buying things where, yeah.
perhaps it really is a relationship. We don't think of it as this way, and perhaps that's a bit of a stretch. But if you've got £3 and you want to buy an item of clothing, and you choose to spend that £3 on something new and something very, very, very cheaply made, that has gone through an incredibly stretched supply chain, you have it right. I mean, you go into the shop to do that and spend that £3, and you've got an abundance of choice. Most things are going to be in your size. You're going to have so many options, and there's always a sale rack as well. Whereas if you go into a charity shop, as you were saying, with the same £3, it is, as you say, it's like the clothes find you, but it's a treasure hunt. If you find something in there that really, really jumps out at you as something that's in your size, in your style, that is like finding treasure. And maybe the process of finding something secondhand in a charity shop actually gives you more of a stronger relationship with that item of clothing, I guess, rather than just, well, there were thousands and I chose that one.
Yeah. I know that the clothes that I have in my wardrobe that are from charity shops are the ones that I've kept because, they're as you said, it's the kind of the treasure hunting aspect. I guess maybe it's the creative aspect of it as well. You kind of, I don't know. As I said, there's a bit more of a kind of risk to it. You're more likely to try different things out because it hasn't cost as much, and then you keep them because you really love them. I think I was talking to someone the other day, and they were saying that they want a new pair of headphones for Christmas because they're pretty sure that their other headphones don't work. And I was saying, well, we need to really make sure that the headphones that you have got work first. And the person was kind of saying, well, no, I just want new headphones. And so I said to them, what if your parents buy you some new headphones and that's your only Christmas present this year? And then you discover that your old headphones work perfectly well. And it really made the person think. And I think that goes back to that kind of value and trying to get away from that kind of throwaway culture of it just doesn't work, or it doesn't work for me, or it's quicker to get something else. Goodness, this episode is challenging me. I hope it's making you think as well. If you're really wanting to give a gift this Christmas that's going to keep on giving, then do consider the singing lessons that I do. I have a special offer of £100 for 6 singing lessons. So do get in touch with me on www.raiseforall.com or find us on any social media. Back to the episode. So Lorraine, we've talked a lot about enough in terms of stuff and practical things, and we're going to revisit that later on when we kind of set our challenge for this episode. But I mentioned right at the beginning that you and I have become friends through long COVID. And I think that you and I would agree that there have been more than enough times where we have said, enough, I cannot take any more. Tell me a little bit about what enough has meant to you, kind of dealing with this disease that we've had.
Yeah, so I think for me, it's about trying to learn how to say no before you get to that point where enough has an exclamation mark on the end of it.
Yeah.
So when we talked about enough being sufficient, the idea of being a busy mum is again something we seem to venerate in this society. But actually being an unbusy mum, wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't being an unbusy mum, particularly if you're dealing with a chronic illness, but for all parents and for all individuals, why do we celebrate busyness so much? And I think that in itself, probably, I'm not a medical person, doesn't help in terms of disease as well. So for me, it's been about listening to my body and acknowledging when my body has had enough, because my body will know long before my brain does.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I did an episode with Becky Metcalf, who's also got long COVID, and she was talking about, she really challenged me because she was talking about how grateful she is to her body that it's kept going, and a way of saying my body's been enough. And I think one of the challenges for me has been being kind to my body, because I have been really mean to it. And I don't just mean looking after it physically, I mean, saying bad messages to it when it's not doing what it needs to be doing. And I think trying to have a positive mindset and a mindset of gratitude is difficult, but it can help in that feeling that, okay, I've got enough for today. I've got, I have got what I need. So such a challenge. It's been such a challenge to me over the last, well, almost 2 years.
Coming up for 2, isn't it?
Oh,
It won't be long.
Yeah.
What an unhappy anniversary. I think again, when we set ourselves in opposition to our own bodies, which again is something that's not our fault, it's something that comes from being in the society that we're in largely, whether it's to do with dissatisfaction in how we look, whether it's to do with dissatisfaction in what our body can and can't do because of disease or illness. There's that massive disconnect between, as you were saying, so the idea of bringing yourself back to listening to your body, but also respecting the fact that it carries you around. It pumps the blood around. It's not your enemy. The disease isn't the fault of your body. The disease is something external that has come in and attacked your body. So rather than berating our bodies for not doing enough for us, perhaps we need to be thanking them that they have managed, they're survivors. They've managed to survive all of these external things, that allow us to still be speaking to one another today.
Yeah, absolutely. And from all this, what I am taking more and more is I'm just, I really feel that God has pointed me towards these amazing people that have got this creativity, which has been I was going to say filler, that's not the right word. It's been something that has given me enough. So when my body's not doing what it needs to do, being able to be creative or write poems, and you and I have been writing parodies and all these amazing things, and suddenly it kind of feels like, I've done enough to keep myself going, to keep myself positive. Tell me a little bit about you as a creative and how that's kind of helped you through the last however many years.
I think when it comes to creativity, I'm going to blow everything else I've said out and say, there's never enough time.
Oh, yeah, amen.
Because, I think when you've got a creative kind of brain, I think everybody obviously has a creative brain to a degree. You or at least I find, I have all these buzzing and burgeoning ideas. And of course, absolutely, I'm time poor. And I just have sort of zero capacity. So I tend to just sit there and an idea will come into me, into my brain. And I'll either sit with it for 2 years or I'll just do it then and there.
Yeah.
So when you set me a challenge the other week to help you with a parody of a few of my favorite things, I literally did it in like 40 minutes because that's it. I was very enthused by the idea. I did it then and there, and it was good enough. And I sent it to you, and it was done. I would dearly love to have more capacity to do creative things because they just swirl around my brain.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to creativity, there's never enough time. There's never enough planners, never enough journals, never enough pens that work when you need them to. Never enough of any of that. Because creativity for people like you and I is just constant, isn't it? I mean, I remember when I first got long COVID and I was like, I must rest. And I remember so clearly, I sat in the bath and I was like, I've got to switch my brain off. And the only way that I could do it was to write a poem about the fact that I needed to switch my brain off. I was like,
excellent.
This is so backwards. But for people that just, ooze this creativity, you have no choice, do you? You can't help it. And so then it's kind of finding out, so what is going to be sufficient for me creatively? And I love that I wanted to write a song. I knew that I couldn't do it. I knew that you could do it. You did it so quickly and then just got it recorded in such a short space of time. And I think people who have seen like the parodies that we do on Instagram, they know that it's not an all singing, all dancing kind of video. It's very simple. It's quite quickly done, but really it's more about the messages. So we are going to put, I will ask Hannah if we can put the song that we did into the podcast, but if not, we'll put the link to the show notes, because that was when I really was channeling my Julie Andrews and really enjoyed it. But we were talking about climate change and COP26, and it was just something that worked together really well. This has been an absolutely fantastic interview. For those people listening today, there's so many different challenges, and it might be that it's just going to be up to you to think about what it is that has challenged you today. So is it about having enough time? Is it about feeling that you aren't enough and you need to address that? Is it about the amount of clothes that you've got in your wardrobe and how you're going to really value what you've got? I think personally, I've spoken to you already about it, Lorraine. I'm going to try and really look at the whole clothes thing. And I would love to just buy second hand this year. And so I guess I'm saying it in this podcast as a bit of accountability. But I'm thinking of starting just a small Facebook group for people that want to do that, so that we can celebrate the things that we buy. And you and I talked about a possible kind of swish event at some point, maybe with some people that are, physically able to meet together. So I'll throw that out there as a kind of a challenge where we can do something. So if you're interested in joining that Facebook group, if you get in touch with me on Facebook or Instagram, and we can kind of get that going for next year. I think that's something, you kind of started the whole interview by saying about not feeling guilty and not worrying that you're never going to do enough, so not doing anything at all. So hopefully this is a small thing that people can do. We're nearly at the end of the podcast, and so we get to the point where I write a poem, and I often do it off the cuff, but I wanted to really kind of think about it and craft it a little bit. So it's been in my head for the last few days. So this is my poem. Enough. It's just stuff, but is it the same for the millionaire or the person sleeping rough? When you have too much, feel too much, can't take any more, and yet more and more and more somehow fills a need. Is it greed? With mounting bills and hungry mouths to feed, take stock, step back, take time, and with peace of mind and promise to be kind, sure enough, your enough is good enough. There we are.
I love that.
My little poem. Now, obviously, we talked about you being creative, and you did send me a poem yesterday, which I loved because it was all the different versions of being enough. Would you like to share that, or would you like us to pop it in the show notes?
I mean, I wrote it at about 11 o'clock last night, but it's
Perfect.
just a series of it's a series of 4 limericks. Let me see if I can find them. Okay. And I think they're supposed to be sisters, at least in my mind. I can share it now?
Absolutely. Yes, please.
There was a girl called Mary Clough who never felt she was enough. She spent each night crying and all day long trying until, that is, she found true love. There was a girl called Maggie Clough who frankly had just had enough of climate news, virus, of Brexits, of migrants. It's not my problem, she said, tough. There was a girl called Zoe Clough who really felt she'd had enough. She smiled when she forced it. She was always exhausted. She never knew life was so tough. There was a girl called Eden Clough who never thought she had enough. She spent every day shopping with no sign of stopping till she was found buried in stuff.
Thank you. I think it sums it up really well, because one of the things that we discovered on the Facebook group is for a lot of people, enough is a feeling, it's a sense, isn't it? And that sums it up really well, because everybody's enough is different. Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. I've loved our discussion.
Thank you.
And just to remind people about the challenge. So we're going to have a little Facebook group for people that want to think about buying secondhand over the next year and kind of celebrating that. But listen back to the podcast and see what you're being challenged to do. That's enough for today. Thank you, Lorraine.
Thank you.
Raindrops not falling are causing new famine. World leaders' policies we must examine, keeping the temperature well within range. This is just one of the things that must change. Treating the climate crisis as non-fiction, ringing alarm bells and fighting extinction. Buying less, owning less, does that seem strange? These are some things which mark positive change. Amazon rainforest, lungs of the earth. Our poorer nations must question their worth. Low-lying islands are being washed away. These are the people to fight for today. When the trees fall, when the crops fail, when the ground is dry, I simply remember the things I can change and realize I have to try. Raindrops are falling and causing landsliding. Big global businesses squirming and hiding. Buying more locally, growing more food. Make sure these promises tied up for good. Cream from the milkman delivered in glass. Growing some clover instead of just grass. Recycle everything, yes, it's a pain. These are a few of the things we could change. Talk with your family, make a strong plan. If every household just does what they can, walking or cycling, even in rain. These are a few of the things we can change. When the trees fall, when the crops fail, when the ground is dry, I simply remember the things I can change and realize I have to try. A final thought from Seb.
Try to make enough time for God and others.
Thank you for listening to the Raise podcast. We hope you feel raised and inspired by this episode. Whilst we're not offering face-to-face classes currently, we are doing online singing lessons where you can have your voice raised as well as your confidence. If you would like to find out more, please visit our website at www.raiseforall.com or find us on social media on either our Facebook or Instagram page. Take care.